Hello there, my friends, and welcome to yet another episode of Delving Deep ESO. In today's episode, we'll be going over the soft lock system, how it will function, as well as how the combat as a whole will feel in Elder Scrolls Online. And let's just dive right in, shall we? Now, the soft lock system is something that really seems to garner up a lot of confusion with players following this game, and as such I felt it was pretty necessary to give a nice overview of it, and really dispel any questions and concerns, and really misconceptions about the soft lock system, because I've seen quite a lot of misinformation about it going around the net. So let me just jump into that. But before I really begin, let me briefly mention tab targeting, since I will be using this terminology quite frequently, I imagine, when describing the different parts of Elder Scrolls combat. Tab targeting is really something that's been in MMOs for a while, but it's simply the act of hitting the tab key or another quickly reachable hotkey if someone's actually rebounded, which automatically targets an enemy in front of you. And this feature, like I said, has been used substantially in MMOs, and it usually defaults to something like this. You'll hit the tab key, and it'll target the nearest foe on screen, and then subsequent key presses will begin cycling through the enemy mobs in the vicinity. So you'll hit the key once, you'll get a target. If that's not the target that you wish to hit, you hit it again, and it'll go on to the next, and so on and so forth, and you continue to hit the tab key until you get the desired target. Now, that's really all there is to the tab targeting system, but it's actually a pretty important tool in MMO combat, so I thought it was worthwhile to mention, because like I said, I will probably go back to that terminology quite a bit. Now, let me give you a point of reference before going into the soft lock system by talking about the hard lock system. Now, hard locking is a mechanic seen in nearly all MMOs, which really allows the player to never miss their target as long as that target has been selected prior to launching skills. Now, what I mean by this is if you have clicked or tab targeted, as I kind of described earlier, you're hard locked onto that target, which is why it's called the hard lock system. And until you manually click off of that target, or you hit the tab key to select another target, you will never miss. Now what this means for combat is that your spells and skills will always hit your target unless you deliberately turn to break line of sight, or hold your character out of range, or you take them around a wall, that sort of thing. Unless you do something deliberate, you will hit your target. And that just means there's no skill involved with actually delivering hits to an enemy in this sort of system. Now, this has been used a lot in prior MMOs, but it's a good place to look at when comparing it to the soft lock system. So from the hard lock system, let's go to a no lock system, just really for completion's sake, so that you have 2 points of reference when we begin talking about the soft lock system. Now, as you would expect, a no lock system, by its name, is something that requires complete character control because it lacks a lock-on sort of mechanic altogether. Best examples of this are really obvious, at being a first-person shooter and the prior test games, where really it's the skillful aiming required that takes for a target to be hit. So that's really what a no-lock system is. It just means that there's no lock-on occurring. It's all about the skill and aiming that reticule. Now, finally, onto the soft lock system, because, like I said, you have 2 points of reference now. The soft lock system being implemented in Elder Scrolls Online is rather a fair compromise on the 2 previously mentioned systems. Now, we will retain the ability to mouse click and tab target it to mark our enemies and provide that visual cue onto who will receive damage when in combat, but the main difference is that instead of like the hard lock system of old, you still must position yourself properly and aim your strikes, similar to a no-lock system. The reticule will be in place, and you have to aim towards your target, and there will obviously be some sort of aim assist occurring in this game to battle latency, but for the most part, you will actually have to aim. If your target is moving, you will need to move, and to keep them in your view, you will need to turn your camera to make sure they don't get out of the sort of central area of your screen so that you can still deliver blows. Now, this is a much more action-oriented combat system than in most MMOs. And before really moving on to the combat as a whole, I do want to mention one last thing that kind of correlates with the soft lock system. Now, if we think this is mainly a huge issue for ranged abilities in spells, because they will pass through enemies which are positioned between yourself and the locked target, and it's almost as if those things are not in your way anymore. Now, I'll really come back to this and give some detail and some context when I discuss really the one major concern I have about the soft lock system and how it's being used, mainly again with ranged attacks. Now, first off, when talking about the combat, I just want to say that it's going to be fast-paced compared to typical hotkey MMOs of the past. It's going to have very mobile and engaging fights. There will be a dodge mechanic nearly identical to the Guild Wars 2 style mechanic utilized there, and that's going to play a major part in combat. And in addition, there's going to be a very small pool of skills and spells which actually require you to stay in place to either charge or do a channel time or perform an animation that's for like a substantial cast time, anything like that. There's going to be very little of that. So ESO is definitely taking some leads from its competitors in that regard and applying it to the combat here. Now, next up, I should mention that ESO will have a hotbar, but it's not going to be quite the same as typical MMO fashion. Now, by hotbar, I mean that it has this sort of setup of skills along the bottom, and this is not typical for the test game. So MMO fans will know this system well, but let me just go into what it is. The hotbar system is, like I said, it's going to place a UI on the bottom of the screen and deliver you a certain number of skills which you can use through hotkeys on your keyboard along with your mouse click weapon strikes. Now, the MMO genre has quickly started to adopt a system that's more akin to dungeon crawlers. Let me just use Diablo as reference here when talking about the hotbars. So instead of the 62,000 skills you get in such like a WoW, or those kind of WoW clones, I'll call them here, where you have so many skills, instead we will have, in ESO's case, 6 hotkeys per hotbar, plus 1 for consumables. Now, the 6 hotkeys are going to be something like this. You'll have, from my understanding, you'll have the Q key is the default, is what I've heard, for your consumable. You'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will be sort of your quote-unquote normal skills, and then you'll have a 6th key relegated to an ultimate ability, which uses up a different resource than the others, being finesse. But I won't go into the finesse system in this video. That will be for another video. Now, in addition to the hotkeys in that system being utilized alongside the test style combat with the mouse, we will also have a Guild Wars 2 style weapon swap system. So the hotbars are not going to be as limiting as it quite sounds here. So you'll have your 5 abilities, your consumable, and your ultimate, yet on weapon swap, you will not only gain new mouse and weapon strikes, you will also gain 6 new hotkeys, and I would be surprised if we don't also see like an alternate consumable bar as well. So essentially you get it's a brand new slate of skills that you can utilize on weapon swap. Now, the weapon swap system isn't going to be quite the same as Guild Wars 2 because this game doesn't have cooldowns, which I'll get to in just a second. And instead, in this game, we will have from my understanding, it will be a huge sort of stamina cost to swap weapons, something along the lines of 65-75% of your total stamina bar to swap weapons so that it can't be abused. But that's something that will obviously change as balance and beta and that sort of thing occur and we get more information on it. Now, like I said, since I was kind of on the subject of cooldowns and resources, let me just explain that ESO doesn't have cooldowns in the same vein as others. There will be limiting factors, but it will not be a cooldown system. We will not be playing a game based on waiting as most MMO fans are used to, but instead we'll be playing a game about thoughtful resource management, which a lot of games have actually tried to give the illusion of. WoW being an example, back in the olden days, as far as I know, this was actually something you had to do. You had both the cooldowns being a restriction and your resources being a restriction, and you kind of had to do a balance. Now, that's become a thing of the past, and these resources are trivialized. And the thing is here, because there's no cooldown system, this is the only thing they have to balance. So this is going to be something that's going to be used for a long time, I imagine. They're not going to have to tweak cooldown so much. Instead, they're going to tweak resource cost, and therefore they can really balance the way the resources gain through post-end game and expansions and that sort of thing, where these stats usually take a turn and become trivialized. Now, as an MMO vet, I've always really found it to be frustrating that everything was a waiting game in prior experiences. You hit this key and it initiates a timer, and it prohibited you from making the preferred call for a situation at hand if it was already on cooldown rather. And this approach Zenimax is taking by really just saying instead of cooldowns, we're going to do a resource management style combat is really exciting to me. And to be honest, is one of the real boons, I think, for the combat. Because, like I said before, it was always kind of tiring to play. You'd hit this button, the cooldown comes up, you move to the next button kind of in your quote-unquote rotation, as it is called in MMO terms. And you just sort of go in circles all day with very little to zero variation whatsoever. So this system looks very exciting, and it has me kind of pumped to jump in and kick some ass with different characters of all kinds, really, because the system has so much flexibility. Now, I'm glad I kind of got into that, but I do want to kind of go back and talk about that one major concern I mentioned a bit earlier in the video. As I kind of said before, the system with the soft locking in place allows ranged attacks to essentially fly through enemies in the forefront as if they don't exist. Now, a good example would be if you have a bow in your hand and you're firing arrows, and the enemy sort of team or mobs or whatever have deliberately taken a defensive stance against you. That's null and void. You can just shoot the guy in the back. There's no ramifications for doing that. There doesn't seem to be any negatives to using the soft lock system in this manner. So hopefully this is something that can be tweaked, and I really hope they change it, because I haven't mentioned this, but ESO actually has it where if you do not have something targeted, you can still fire off spells almost as if it was a no-lock system, that sort of thing. And I don't quite understand their thinking that spells would suddenly pass through targets if you have them locked on, because if you shoot without a lock on, it's going to hit the first thing in your view, obviously. So I'm not really sure they're thinking on this, and I really don't understand what they're trying to do here, because I've heard some people saying that this is it's going to be this way because they can't figure out which target is going to be having the collision and that sort of thing. But that doesn't make sense, because if someone is just for example, they have something tab targeted, it dies, and they're still spamming their mouse button, you're still going to be firing shots, just like I said with the bow, and it's going to hit the next thing right there. So that doesn't make sense to me. There's already collision in place for that sort of thing. So it's not really making sense what their choice is going here, and really I don't really understand it. So I mean, I've heard this argument as well. I guess I'll go over it into that their argument being that you won't know what you're going to hit. And that doesn't make sense to me either, because they're going for an action-oriented combat style, which is promoting mobility and thoughtfulness and that sort of thing. And positioning is a big part of that, especially in what I'll call like upper tier content, be it PvE, and this was going to have some huge ramifications in PvP as well. It takes away the point of it all. It seems very counterintuitive. I don't really understand where they're going with this. If it's a technical thing, I think they need to really kind of reevaluate it, especially with the pushback. They better utilize this time to really kind of come up with better answers and reasonings behind this. Now, I've heard some people make this next argument, and I actually kind of agree, but it's still frustrating, is that in the thick of it all, we're not going to care who we're hitting. I've seen this argument before, and honestly, that's the MMO crowd talking, because I know for a fact that test fans are not going to want to just shoot through ghosts. They're going to want to take aim, and they want that sense of accomplishment. And I feel like that's actually been taken away from MMOs. Like I said, with the hardlock system, it just whatever throws spells and you hit your thing every time. There's no sense in accomplishment of actually hitting your target. And I really hope they reevaluate this to give that sense of accomplishment back. Now, that's really all there is for me in this kind of random rant. That's really my one concern about the combat system, especially in tandem with the soft lock system being implemented. So let me just go back to kind of a positive high note. Despite my concerns about the soft lock system and its implementation with ranged attacks for the most part, it's really got this overall feel of combat that's shaping up well. They aren't breaking any walls down with this, but they're definitely making some fine steps in the right direction. It's really kind of going well, and they're like I said in some of my previous videos, when they explain some things that don't really get me engaged and they kind of put me off a little bit, I can always go back to a couple things. In this instance, the combat and the resource management part of their sort of action combat system really is engaging to me. And I kind of mentioned in a previous video that even though I get down on some decisions they've made, the skill line system is really pulling me back in. So this game is I kind of have a love-hate relationship with this game because I really want it to come out well, and they have made some odd decisions, but like I said, they pushed it back a little bit to get some things done, and I actually have a pretty cool theory about that, but I'll get to that in just a second. But really, that's it for me on this episode of Delving Deep ESO in terms of the soft lock system and the action combat. But before I sign off, let me question you all of something. I intend to do a lot more ESO coverage fairly soon, yet there's so many ideas in my head. I kind of want to ask you all what you'd like to see first. Would you like to see typical videos, and one being and at least in the current sort of a resources finesse and a basic sort of theory crafting video? That could change. I'm not really sure how well I can put that one together, but would you like to see a video kind of on those things? Would you like to see a video on exploration questing and a really kind of brief overview of Cyrodiil? I will probably do a PvP video a bit down the line. I'm not a PvP guy, so it's kind of hard for me to get all pumped to do that video. But this last one here, or would you like to see a video about, like I said, I had some amazing theories pop into my head the other day while I was having kind of a boring day at work, and I'd kind of I don't really want to spoil any of the ideas because I think anyway, they're pretty fantastic. But let me just call it would be like a speculation special, shall we? And I really, just let me know what you guys would like to see first, because I'm obviously going to do all of these, but since I am kind of working with limited time and I want to pump out the content you guys want to see, let me know down in the comments and that sort of thing. Let me know on the Facebook page. And while I'm on that, just please guys, like, subscribe, give me some feedback down below. I'm really craving for it. Follow on that Facebook page, as I mentioned, for updates, and really just stick to the Novel Pulse Gaming YouTube channel for everything Elder Scrolls Online and the gaming industry as a whole. So this has been Pulse, guys, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.